Audio.
Mountaineering just pushes us in all of the ways. So it's not just physical. It's not just like problem solving mental. It's got this huge emotional piece.
Hey y'all, welcome back to The Struggle. Hope you're doing great. Hope you're having a good day. It is snowing like crazy here in Kentucky. I grew up in Michigan, and so I'm used to it, but Kentucky's freaking out. It's snowing like crazy, but I feel like this is a good thing. This is on theme for this pro clinic here with Adrian Ballinger about Mountaineering 101, high altitude climbing, getting up into the big mountains and having some big epic experiences, some life-changing experiences at altitude. A little bit of an expansion on what I would typically talk about here on this show. You know, we tend to be very kind of focused and obsessed with climbing and you know, all its forms, right? And this pushes a little bit towards the edges of that. There certainly is climbing when we're talking about mountaineering. There's a lot of skill that goes into a lot of those objectives, whether it's high altitude, alpine style climbing, or just going out into the big mountains and needing to understand ropes and rigging and systems. So that, you know, there's obviously a very good crossover there, but this pushes more into kind of hiking, right? Like extreme, push your mental, physical, and emotional self to the limit. And I'm really interested in this. And honestly, after this conversation that I had with Adrian, I'm like probably as psyched as I've ever been to have one of these experiences. So if, like me, you enjoy climbing because you love to be out in nature and you like to connect with the natural world, push yourself in ways that can't always happen kind of under super controlled circumstances, and also just like enjoy a little bit of the struggle, the epic nature of some of these big days that we can have out there, I really think you're going to enjoy this conversation with Adrian. This guy is an absolute machine. He has really explored the limits of what human capability is when it comes to endurance sports. He has summited Everest 9 times. He's done K2. He's done loads of the big mountains in his career around the world with and without supplemental oxygen. He started Alpenglow Expeditions, which is his guiding company, which is really one of the, if not the premier guiding companies in the world when it comes to making these kinds of life-changing experiences accessible for people who have never done it, like me, who are just wanting to learn and explore and maybe dabble in some higher altitude adventures, all the way up to those who are incredibly experienced in big mountains and doing 8,000 meter peaks and the 7 summits and Everest summits and all of this kind of thing. We talk about all of that. We talk about all of that in this pro clinic, kind of this road, if you will, to the mountain of your dreams and the stepping stones that Adrian recommends we take. He shares with us in this pro clinic how we can have these experiences on a budget, like $500, you know, learn the skills, go out and take on some of these 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 meter peaks ourselves, all the way up to those who, maybe like me, don't have the time or honestly even the interest to learn all of this stuff myself, but I still am really interested in having an experience like this, standing on top of a peak and just enjoying those views and the camaraderie of the team and the struggle to get there, and you know, an 18-hour push and sunrise on a snow-capped mountain. Like, all of that sounds really cool to me, but I can't invest the many years that it would take to learn all of these skills. And that's where Alpenglow comes in. And so Adrian talks me through, and us, you, the audience, through how we could have these kinds of experiences and only take 5 days off work doing it. An international high-altitude summit experience, or at least a summit push. It's not a guarantee that you get to the top, but how we can have that in like 9 days. So we talk about planning, training, objectives, what would be a great entry-level mountain. He presents to me like his favorite 20,000-foot peak, which now I'm kind of got my heart set on as something that I want to try to do. We go through all of that in this pro clinic. If you have any interest in this kind of adventure at all, this is the episode for you. And honestly, even if you don't have any interest in it, I think by the end of this thing, you are going to have some interest in it, because we're on this planet for a pretty short period of time when you think about it. And for those of us who have the health and the skill and the psych and the budget and the time and all of these little factors that need to come together, for those of us that have that in our life, to be able to go out and internationally climb something really high, something that pushes us to our limits, something where we discover something about ourselves and have a bit of a life-changing experience. I mean, that sounds pretty freaking cool to me. So I really hope you enjoy this conversation. Let's just get into it right now with Adrian Ballinger. For some reason, I thought you were out in like Switzerland or something like that. Are you just in California right now? Or are you home?
We're actually in Vegas right now.
Oh,
So
you're in
we
Vegas.
came back we went home for a couple of weeks and skied and, did some Alpenglow things and had holidays. And then we came back down here and we just have like 2 weeks down here. Em was like to get some more climbing in. Season hasn't really kicked off yet in Tahoe. So it was a good time to enjoy some more desert limestone.
Dude, I love it. Well, it's an early start for you over there. I appreciate it. You've got your coffee though, so we're good.
I got my coffee and it was definitely by choice. When I booked this with you, we didn't know if it would be a climbing day or not a climbing day. So it's like, do it 7 till 9 or whatever, and then we can still go out if we want to. And it turns out we are going to climb today. So that'll be
good,
fun.
good. Well, we're going to get all warmed up here. And, I was talking with Colette. She was like, make sure you ask Adrian about his coffee because he's pretty obsessed about his coffee. And so I see you're already into. You're not the type of person who waits a few hours before starting the coffee in the morning. It looks like you just jump right in.
Absolutely not. Yeah, every day, right away, as soon as I wake up. It's on a timer here in Vegas, so it grinds. I wake up to the sound of like grinding beans, and then drip. It's ready to go.
Very good. And Emily and Arrow are still sleeping, or are they around this morning?
Em's up, kind of doing her morning thing, reading, drinking coffee. Arrow will wake up in the next half hour or so. And hopefully the noise levels will all work. That's the plan.
It's all good. No, it's all good.
And you're in Lexington, right?
I'm in Louisville.
Oh, you're in Louisville. Sorry.
Lexington would be nice. A little bit closer strike to the red, but it's a 2-hour drive to the red. And yeah, man, I love it out here. You guys come out here, I feel like every once in a while, right?
It's been a few years now, but we've been talking about really wanting to get back. I love it there. It was a really hard style for me. That kind of like consistent endurance-y overhanging style was not mine, but I learned so much my seasons there. So yeah, I'm a fan.
Oh man, it's so good. Yeah, it's the red has a way of humbling no matter where the climber is coming from. I remember Jordan Cannon came out last year and we did some climbing together, and he's just like an endurance machine.
Yeah.
And it still took him like 10 days to kind of get acclimated to that like steep jug haul kind of Red River pump. So it's an experience for sure. Now you're like an absolute endurance aerobic monster. So I would feel like you would actually adapt pretty quick to it once you get out here.
Yeah, I don't know. Somehow the style is different. I think there's something to be said. If you learn how to manage pump as a kid, it's a very specific thing, I think, pump and climbing. And when I see the kids, and I include Emily in that, that she learned in the gym and had a competition background, like
right.
They just know how to manage pump and to lower their heart rate and to kind of, be able to rest on steep climbs. And that's something that, coming to projecting and sport climbing and steep climbing later, like it's been really hard to build that.
Well, I fit into that category as well. I didn't start climbing until I was 30, and then and it was out west, and it was like jamming on granite and multi-pitch. And so when we moved out to Kentucky, this was 7 years ago now, I went to the red. I was like, oh my God. I just felt like I was learning a totally different sport. It was, totally. I started from 5'6" and just started working my way back up into the grades that I was at out west. So yeah, it's a good time. Well, if you guys make it out here, I owe you a cabin stay.
Absolutely.
Since you were so gracious to host me in Vegas. My wife and I have a little cabin at the red, and anytime it's available, but you guys are welcome to it. I've been trying to convince the Honolds to come out too. Sonny is super into it, and Alex is such a curmudgeon. I think he doesn't like nature. I think he doesn't like vegetation. I think he likes the desert vibe.
You might be right. Oh, they have to spend time there, though. I think it would take him very little time to click in there and realize like how much he loves it, and just how much you can climb. Right? It's unbelievable how much volume you can do in a day, and that guy loves volume.
Totally. Yeah. And like the approaches are chill. It's great for kids. There's creeks and waterfalls. And, if I never have to do the hike to the Clear Light Cave again, I'd be fine with it. I'm like puking. It's like the hardest, of course, I'm always hiking out there with endurance athletes who, totally. It's a la-di-da hike for them. But still, the for a family situation, for like Arrow or, their kids or whatever, like, I bring my kids out there all the time with me, and I get in a bunch of pitches and they just play in the creek and maybe get a climb in or whatever. But, it's not a bad place to hang out, really, as families go.
Absolutely. All right.
Cool, man. Well, we're not here to talk about rock climbing, although I'm sure we'll interweave a lot of it, because this is a climbing podcast, and we're making a little bit of an expansion into the conversation here, because I've been really interested and fascinated with mountaineering and big mountains and high altitude stuff, and haven't dove into it. I don't know if I'm educated enough or if I'm fit enough. And I think a lot of people who are listening are probably wondering these same things. I think when I look at your adventures that you go on, the expeditions that you go on, and others that I follow, and the experience of being in those big mountains, or we may have to define big mountains, because even some that I see around here in, like Mount Rainier, some friends of mine did recently, and I was like, God, that looks amazing, but I don't know what it takes. I don't know if I have what it takes. And so I'm just excited and grateful that you're, joining us here today to talk through kind of like a mountaineering 101, if you will. This is like full Gumby status is this conversation. And I appreciate the patience in advance of probably the many dumb questions I'm going to be throwing at you.
That sounds great. No, of course. I love talking mountaineering and how to get people into it. I mean, that's obviously been kind of the foundation of my career in many ways, right? Like, it's like both through professional athlete stuff and mountain guiding, and then owning a guide company. It's like, how can I get more people to try doing these things and have these powerful experiences that we know exist out there? So I love talking about it.
And I really like that. I've noticed that in listening to you on your podcast, The Duffel Shuffle, as well as a guest on many different podcasts. Sure. I've heard you talking with Chris Kalous on their show, and Andrew Bisharat and Rich Roll not too long ago. You guys had a fantastic conversation. Yeah. There's sometimes is within climbing or sports, maybe in general, certain viewpoints where you kind of want to keep it to yourself. And you're like, oh, let's keep this a little bit of a closed club. Let's keep this the best kept secret. Let's not try to make it welcoming. And even in the world of mountaineering, where it seems to sometimes get some blowback about certain mountains, Everest maybe being the most prominent, where there's a lot of people on it, and look at what's happened, look at these lines. And at least from what I've read from what you've written or heard in your interviews, you seem to take a position on the other side of that, wanting to be more welcoming, wanting to get more people into the sport. Is that a fair assessment?
100%. That's a fair assessment. Like, as a local in a small ski town, like I live in Lake Tahoe, California most of the time, and I'm so passionate about the playing we get to do there. I do recognize the challenges that bringing more people into these sports and into these places presents to local gateway communities. Like, it is more challenging. We do have more traffic. The prices of our housing and food and everything is going up and up. And it is harder to find those like remote, solitary experiences that are an important part of playing in the wilderness. You have to go a bit further. You have to plan to get to the parking lot before it fills, things like that. And so I don't want to suggest that I'm like very Pollyannish, that there are no issues to have more people in these sports. But again, first and foremost, I believe the power of these experiences are so great and have so much potential for changing individuals and therefore communities, that I have no question in my brain that the net positive is greater than the net negative. And the challenges, in many ways, we can mitigate through thoughtful ways that we bring new people into the sport, and through thoughtful policies from land managers, and for thinking about things like transportation and parking. And so I don't want the challenges to be utilized for gatekeeping. And I just hate the attitude of like, I remember when we were all alone out here with our bros or whatever it was. It's just like, shut the fuck up, like right. You remember how much you love that because of how special and powerful it was for you. So why don't you try to find ways to allow that for others? So yes, that has always been my viewpoint, even on the busiest mountains of the world, like Mont Blanc or the Matterhorn or Mount Whitney here closer to home, or Mount Everest as far afield as you can get. I believe there are challenges, if we take them on honestly and seriously, that we can work through.
Well, that comes through certainly in how I've heard you speak about these experiences in the Big Mountain, and it seems to be one of the pillars in which you've built Alpenglow, your guiding company, around, which is making this accessible, but also treating these expeditions and these big mountains with the respect that they deserve, and I think holding yourselves to the highest bar of the guiding companies out there. And I want to put a pin in that because I want to talk about that part of a mountaineering experience, which is, one of the ways to access this experience is to spend a bunch of money and go and hire a great guiding company like Alpenglow. But there are other ways to access it, I think, as well. And maybe that will be a great entree to this conversation here is asking you to kind of go back in the Wayback Machine and recall one of, or maybe your first experiences on a big mountain or a mountaineering experience as somebody like myself who might be considering something like this, or those who are listening. Everybody has a first experience at some point in time. Sometimes it goes well, sometimes it doesn't, but it sounds like for you, there's a transformative experience there because this is what you've made your career out of. And could you just share with me a little bit about what that first time up in the big mountains was like for you?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. My sort of formative first experience at altitude actually was very memorable and has continued to be. Obviously, I shaped my life around it. So it's a fun story to share. So my family moved from England to New England, Massachusetts, when I was 6 years old. And they were not an outdoorsy family at all. But people in New England, they just do things outside. They go camping, they go hiking, things like that. So I was doing all those things. And I fell in through family friends to the opportunity to really learn about rock climbing when I was really young, like 12 years old. So I was skiing as soon as I was 6. I was rock climbing by the time I was 12. I was trad leading by the time I was 14. So I had this early experience. And once we had driver's licenses, I was basically spending all the time I could in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, like trying to get myself killed. That's basically what I did through high school. But it was a hobby, right? My family was very academically focused and all of those types of things. So I ended up going to college in Washington, D.C. Definitely not a lot of mountains there, but it had an outdoor leadership program being run by this well-known climber named Chris Warner, who ultimately went on to start the Earth Treks climbing gyms that are around D.C. and Golden, Colorado, and places like that. But at the time, he was a dirtbag trying to support his expeditions by working this fancy little college program in D.C. between his trips. So I met him as a freshman at college. He recognized that I had some skills and he took me on as an intern. So I started helping out through his college program. And he was leading a group of clients to Ecuador to climb 6,000 meter peaks, 20,000 foot peaks. I had never done anything taller than Mount Washington, so 6,000 feet. And 4 days before the trip left, I was home for Christmas break. One of his clients broke their leg, but the trip was fully paid for. And so he called me at my house at home. This is like early 90s, no cell phones, all that fun stuff. And I remember like hanging out in my kitchen and like I'm talking to Chris, and he's a little intimidating. And I don't know why he's calling me. He's like, got this free spot on this trip to Ecuador. And if you can find a way to get to Quito, the capital, buy a plane ticket, everything else is covered. And my parents were like, you can, it's your first holiday home, you're a freshman, all these different things. And, I remember begging and being like, I will never go to Ecuador again. I will never climb a tall mountain again. You have to help me have this opportunity. And so we ended up getting permission and figuring out how to pay for the plane ticket. And I flew down and I was going to climb these 20,000 foot peaks. I was run crew in college. I was a good athlete. I was 17 or 18 years old. Everyone else on the trip was in their 40s, classic what you would imagine like a client on these type of like 7 summits trips to be perhaps. Right. And I was like, I am going to crush these guys. And I essentially listened to none of the advice from the guides and from Chris, didn't listen to my body, made terrible decisions, and got full cerebral edema on the first peak called Cotopaxi.
Oh my
I climbed with a guide who spoke no English, spent, let's say 14 hours going up, did everything wrong, ended up on the summit, hallucinating, not able to walk because I was so, you end up looking like you're drunk, like stumbling and mumbling and fumbling and things like that. Right. I needed fully supported and rescued to get down by my team.
Oh my God.
So it was as real as it gets, vomiting blood. I remember having hallucinations, asking people why they had built condominiums on the summit of this beautiful mountain. And obviously there were no condos there. Like I was out. People, the people who were on that trip, I'm still friends with a couple of them. And now they just love to remind me every couple of years of that first trip. But I came down devastated, body destroyed, couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't do anything. It was like, Chris, I want to go home. Like, I'm bad at this. That was the worst thing that's ever happened to me. It hurt so badly. And he was like, cool, why don't you come and do these like cultural things that we always do between mountains. Then before the second mountain, we'll drop you off at the airport and you go home. And over those 3 days of doing cultural things, it went from being the worst experience in my life to like the first time that my body, brain, and like emotional self had been pushed to this total limit, and that I had to depend on a team of people to help me through. And it was all I wanted to do. And I ended up staying, climbing the next 2 peaks. I was a little bit smarter about my body and my nutrition and my pace and all these things, summiting the next 2 peaks. And like that just built this base of like, wow, that is the most powerful experience I've had in my life to date.
Oh God, I love that story because it really hits, it kind of hits the extremes. It like is essentially the what not to do. It sounds like
100%.
In terms of a first mountaineering experience, which is great because as we, the listener, may be considering something like this, it sounds like you learned some hard lessons on that first one, but still it didn't push you away. It was special enough. And we talk about type 2 fun on the podcast here quite a bit as climbers when we're training, when we're pushing ourselves on bigger days. Maybe that was type 3 fun, type 4 fun. I'm not quite sure, but
it's the type that never becomes fun.
Yeah, exactly. It was the fun in the it was over and you reflected on it and obviously learned from it and became a better mountaineer as a result. And I think that dovetails well into this concept of struggle, which of course is the name of the show here. And we try to look at things through this lens of struggle because struggle unites us. And so reflecting not just on that first experience, but now many years on some of the most formidable mountains in the world, many trips to Everest. Was it nine Everest summits, I think?
9 Everest summits.
And counting. K2 with oxygen, without oxygen. I mean, you've really pushed yourself to, I think, the absolute limits of human capability. When you reflect on all of that, what is your relationship with struggle? What does struggle mean to you as an adventurer, as a mountaineer?
I mean, I just love the title and theme to your podcast because struggle is the whole darn thing, right? To me, the way I always think about it is like, the summit photo in the sunset with the hugs and, all that goes on Instagram. Like that is like, of course we enjoy that, but it's like such a tiny part of what we do and why we do it, especially in the big mountains. Like the whole piece of the experience that to me has potentially power to change us, and that I remember is the whole process leading up to that, and generally where things go wrong, and then we have to problem solve and suffer and struggle to find our ways through whatever went wrong to get back on the path to be able to continue to take steps forward. And that's what I really think I fell in love with out there. That first trip and then many trips after that was, number one, that mountaineering, it just pushes us in all of the ways. So it's not just physical. It's not just like problem solving mental. It's got this huge emotional piece, both because of risk. You are managing risk. Risk is integral. And I think it really differentiates climbing from, let's say, a triathlon. Like so many of my clients come and they're really strong triathlon athletes. There's a lot of crossover, right? Between how you need to train and the effort it takes and the suffering that it takes. But I think what I see as being different is that in those races, you can DNF in any aid station and you just step out and there's a medic. And if you need even more than a medic, there's resources there. And in climbing, there just is no DNFing because you still need to get back down. There's no like, I've reached my max, tap out. Like when you tap out, you still have to get you and your teammates back down off the mountain. And that can take just as much time as getting up, just as much effort. It can have more risk. And for me, and it's not for everyone, but for me, that heightens the whole experience and the teams that we're formed into, the bonds, the trust that we learn to lean on. And it awakens a part of my, I guess, like brain that feels different than pure physical challenges. So I keep coming back to it.
It really interests me. And I think this is a good opportunity now to kind of dive into the 101 nature of this that you do, because that experience interests me. The views interest me. I mean, just for kind of like on the most simplest level, like being on top of something and being able to look out and really take in this incredible world is very interesting, especially as somebody like myself where I'm a sport climber. You climb a pitch and you come down and you're in beautiful nature. And I do multi-pitch every once in a while. I'll go out to the Valley or, Southern California or out in Vegas, and there's some great multi-pitch out there. And it really does feel cool to be at the top of something. And then this is just that times a million is kind of what it seems like in terms of the experience. But to your point, there is risk that's different than the risk that we manage as rock climbers, whether it's making sure a route is well bolted and you're communicating with your belayer, or making sure that you're placing good gear if you're climbing trad and your systems are backed up and you're climbing with a partner who knows what they're doing. That's different than some of the what seem like more kind of high stakes risks when we're talking about the big mountains, when we're at altitude. And as you experienced on that first experience to Cotopaxi, where you can suffer some really dangerous medical conditions at high altitude, and then, to your point, have to get down. So I want to talk through all of that, because I think for me, I don't know what risks are worth having concern about, and which ones are just like, oh yeah, actually, yes, this exists, but we manage this way, and so you don't really have to worry about it. And so there's a lot of demystifying, I think, that I want to go through here as we have this conversation. But first, I think maybe it makes sense to actually go even simpler and get some like definitions out of the way here. And so we're talking about mountaineering. There's alpine, there's high altitude climbing, there's big mountains, go to the big mountains. There's different 1,000 meter, 6,000 meters, 7,000 meter, 8,000 meters. So could you give me like a 101 baseline here of some of the definitions?
Sure. I think, maybe defining some of these terms is risky because people do just leave them so gray and big, and not everyone probably agrees, like so many things in climbing, right? If you get 6 climbers together and ask them their opinion on pretty much anything, a climbing shoe, a route, a rock fall hazard, they're going to disagree. It's one of the beauties. Things are not black and white in our sport. But yeah, a few terms that I use a lot. So I say high altitude all the time. And obviously that's a total gray area. But for me, over now being a mountain guide through my guide company, Alpenglow Expeditions, and before that for other companies, seeing thousands of clients and climbers on different mountains, I kind of put the line at 18,000 feet. So like 5,500 meters. Most people can kind of get away with going to almost 18,000 feet. And so all the 14ers in California and Colorado and things like that, you can kind of get away with doing nothing. And most people are going to be okay. You can get high altitude illnesses that can be dangerous on 14ers, don't get me wrong. But, most people are going to be able to, in a weekend, go from sea level, kind of get up there, get back down, hurt, suffer, but be okay. Above 18, you start needing to use techniques and well-studied practices that are medically backed in order to stay safe above 18. So that's what I call high altitude.
And just so I'm understanding kind of real-world example, 18,000 feet, that doesn't exist here in the continental United States.
Not in the lower 48. Denali is 20,000 feet tall. So you got to go to Alaska to get above 18. In the lower 48, there's nothing above 15,000 feet. Lots and lots of 14ers. But Alaska is 20, and it's a very serious mountain. And then same thing as you go down to Mexico, there's peaks over 18,000 feet, loads in the Andes, South America, a couple in Africa. And then
Kilimanjaro is 18,000
exactly,
something, right?
Kilimanjaro, yep. And Mount Kenya is also quite tall. And then an untold number in Asia, in the Himalayas. Just
those are the little ones.
Endless. Europe really only has Elbrus in Russia that's getting up into that higher level. It's still not 18,000 feet. Everything in Europe is lower.
Okay, so high altitude for your definition is 18,000 feet. There are still some adventures to be had on mountains that are lower than, lower elevation than 18,000 feet. But you're saying in terms of high altitude where there may be some supplemental oxygen needed, or other ways, to your point, to kind of manage the effects of that altitude on you. That's the line that you're drawing.
Yeah, definitely not supplemental oxygen until much higher. We can talk about that if we want to, because there's an interesting trend happening in our sport where what I would call mountain tourism instead of mountain guiding is starting to become a thing. And one of the big differentiating factors is people are starting to use oxygen at very, very low elevations to essentially turn mountains into feeling maybe like Central Park. And I'm not here to say what's right or wrong in terms of how we climb these mountains, but to me, there is a way to take away all of the unknowns in climbing, essentially putting a spacesuit on and going for a walk. And that is different to me than what I do, what Alpenglow Expeditions does, and where I feel the most power is. So we can go there if we want to or not. And then to your point, so that is no way, just high altitude in no way defines mountaineering or not mountaineering, because there are epic mountaineering experiences to be had in the lower 48 states. And to your point, it's just that their altitude is not the primary challenge. The elevation change might still be huge. You can go to Mount Rainier, you've mentioned it a couple of times, and you're climbing from, 6,000 feet to 14,000 feet. An 8,000 foot day or over 2 days is a huge elevation change. It's just not high altitude. And you can have glaciers with crevasses and need to wear crampons and use ice axes and rope systems, all those things. And so other definitions you were looking for, they're a little bit looser. Mountaineering is the big general category over everything. It's over high altitude. It's over alpinism. It's over all of it. I would say if you're using, ropes and technical gear to get to a summit, you are mountaineering. If you're not using technical gear like ropes, then you're hiking. And perhaps if you're not attempting to get to a summit, you are rock climbing. It's a little bit loose, but there's somewhere to start. Alpinism, we usually think of as being more technical style climbing, not just walking. So where the line is between, pure mountaineering versus alpinism, again, it's gray, but are you climbing or are you walking, but with ropes and glaciated terrain? Sometimes it's just walking. It's low angle, but you still need a rope because of crevasses and things like that. People probably wouldn't call that alpinism.
So alpinism, there's essentially rock climb. You would be climbing pitches as part of that. Like I think about Patagonia or something like that, where you're hiking, but then you're also climbing some pitches, and then you're hiking along maybe between peaks, like on a shoulder between peaks, but then you're also building anchors and rappelling down. Like that would be considered alpinism. Yeah,
and it might be rock climbing or it might be ice climbing, right? So it's not pure rock that defines it, but exactly, I like that. It's kind of like you're pitching climbing. It's increased that level of technical difficulty when you're moving into the space of alpinism.
Got it. Okay. Well, then I appreciate the definitions there. And again, just apologies for the ignorance here, but I'm excited about this. I don't know shit about it. And so this is why we're having the conversation. If I'm reaching out to you and the average listener is here, fairly physically fit, we're climbers, we're usually, hikers as a result because we're doing approaches and typically, multi-sport athletes anyway. So we're maybe doing some cycling as part of our training or whatever. There's a general physical fitness, if you will, but maybe not any exposure to higher altitude, to navigating anything with snow or ice on it, at least in my case. What questions should I be asking you? Actually, maybe I should. You're a podcast host, so maybe you should take the lead here. But essentially, I want to dip a toe in this thing. I want to see if this is for me. Yeah. Do you recommend entry level adventures, or are there things that are? You mentioned 14ers, which I've done some in California, but those were more kind of day hikes. Like maybe it would take 6 hours or 8 hours, but it would be an up and down. It was fun. It was cool. I was proud of the 14ers I've done, but if I'm looking to go, bump it up a notch or two or three, you don't just start by, I don't think, booking a flight to Nepal and saying let's go. There's some stepping stones, right? So what do those stepping stones look like? Yeah.
And I love how you framed that, because I am all about stepping stones or kind of paths or roads to the mountain of your dreams kind of thing. And, that is one of my challenges, not wanting to, like you said earlier, gatekeep or make this seem like there are hard limits of how to do this. And yet at the same time, what we've seen in the industry over the past decade to 20 years, especially on the popular mountains like Everest and the Matterhorn and Mont Blanc and the other tall Denali, things like that, we're seeing people skip a lot of stepping stones, trying to sort of hack climbing. That's kind of a popular phrase in our generation. And we're seeing a much higher rate of accidents due to that as more people enter the sport. And so I do think it's a sport to be kind of approached respectfully. And one of the best ways to do that is to build experience through stepping stones. The person you described, like someone who's fit, maybe understands how to train from other sports, things like that, has some climbing background from rock climbing, so some understanding of ropes and rope systems, and is interested in getting in the mountains. That's like, for me as a guide, that's the dream. Like, you are moldable in terms of like experience in the big mountains because you haven't learned a bunch of bad habits, but you have the fitness, or at least the understanding of how to gain fitness, the willingness to work hard. Rock climbers naturally understand that most of the time you fail and then sometimes you succeed, and that's what makes the succeeding so special, and that's very true in the mountains. And to an even greater degree in the mountains, like more things are out of your control. Like in rock climbing, still lots of things are out of your control, but we probably try to control them. We try to sleep well, we get massage, we train, we look at the humidity and like temperatures and things for our ascend, stuff like that. As we go to these big mountains, you're basically accepting that like on summit day, instead of feeling the best you could, like on your send try on your route, like you're probably going to feel the worst you felt all trip on the night you wake up and try to go for the summit. You haven't gotten to control the weather. You hope you read the forecast, right? You know, all these things. So a lot of times, like a lot of stuff out of your control is kind of going wrong. And then you're managing those things and seeing if you can still wind your way to your goal, the summit.
Sure.
So yeah, what you described, people do very well when they come into the mountains with a skill set like you have, or probably a lot of your listeners have. How to do it, there are lots of different paths. You can go internationally right away. You can add in high altitude right away. But if I was to choose, if someone just said, what's the best path? The first thing to do is to go out and take a couple of day or a long weekend somewhere in probably the American West. You can almost do it in New England if you want to. Take a basic mountaineering course. So Alpenglow, we run an intro to mountaineering in Lake Tahoe in the spring, because that's when our mountains go from really snowy and you definitely need skis to, okay, now we can climb them with snow covered, but with crampons and ice axes and things like that. There are lots of places to do this across the United States and the Alps. But you're going out, you're not dealing with altitude yet, or foreign countries and like stomach bugs and all that. And you're just focusing on crampon work, ice axe work, basic rope work. And any sort of short multi-day program is going to at least include some sort of summit. You're going to put all those skills together on day 2 or day 3 and go summit the mountain. We do a lot of that in Northern California on Mount Shasta, one of the tallest peaks in Northern California. It's a volcano. It has huge vertical. Maybe you've climbed it.
I haven't, but I've flown over it, and I'm like, God, that's a beautiful looking volcano. I mean, it's like it's absolutely stunning. It like looks like Mount Fuji or something like that.
Absolutely, and it's a 14er, but like summiting it is a proud effort. The other thing it encompasses that I think is really important that people miss is actually camping skills, kind of like camping backpacking. Traditionally, when someone went mountaineering 30 years ago, they had already done multi-day backpacking trips for years. It was part of our culture.
Right.
Now, like, I haven't been on a multi-day backpacking trip unless I'm going to climb something, in decades. And that's true for a lot of people. And so if you've never like backcountry camped before, that's also, so not car camped, not the back of the truck or out of the Prius or Subaru or whatever it is. If you've never backcountry camped, that's another set of skills that are just absolutely crucial, because the key to being successful in mountains is efficiency. We fail because we lose little bits of energy, wasting efficiency on lots of different areas that ultimately put us in a position to not have enough in the tank on summit day. And so we need to reduce those inefficiencies through experience. And backcountry camping is another area that can be worked on a trip like I just described, a basic mountaineering program. But you can also do that on your own pretty much anywhere in the States through friends, things like that. Get out backpacking.
Yeah, well, I love that. I mean, it's like always on my list every year is like, go backpacking more. And then I always end up just like going climbing more, which
totally
is just, the one kind of pulls from the time of the other. But there are certainly ways to, like here at the Red, to like, backpack for a weekend and also climb. So maybe it's now in my mid 40s, I'm a little less excited about sleeping on the ground than I was, 20 years ago when I used to backpack all the time.
Totally.
But with an objective, I think that becomes more exciting because one's willingness to suffer And we're talking about like elective struggle here, of course.
Yes.
When we're talking about these adventure sports, one's willingness, in my case at least, goes way up if I've got a goal. And so to set a goal and then work towards it, I think is exciting. And an entry-level mountaineering course like you guys do at Alpenglow, or you said, other outfits around offer those, sounds like a great way to understand some of the basic systems, maybe build on the climbing knowledge that we have. But the idea, of course, is that that's the first step. That's the first stepping stone towards where we're going. And I'd love to just
keep going,
go down this path a little bit further and talk about, maybe there's an achievable goal. Again, like I feel like K2 probably that's 20 steps down the path, right? So let's continue down this road here, this theoretical road. Like what would come next and what could I be working towards that is achievable for a dad who works and doesn't have a ton of time or a ton of money, but, could find some time and some money, like where do we go next?
Yeah, absolutely. And, one of the cool things is, so people enter this path and usually one of a couple of things happens. Occasionally someone's just like, that was cool, not for me. I'm going to go back to like hard, high-end rock climbing. You know, I mean, that happened to Honnold. Honnold went and climbed some high altitude peaks with us. He went to Vincent in Antarctica. He went to Aconcagua. Like, he was a totally capable high altitude climber. But he was like, I just spent like 17 days festering to do this one cool thing, right? Standing on top of this one mountain. That's 17 days I could have been in the Clear Lake Cave or whatever, like working on my project and climbing a lot more. So he's like, forget that high altitude stuff. So that's one possible path. You have some of these adventures and you're just like, meh, it's not for me, or at least it's not for me right now. The second path is some people just really connect with the endurance and altitude side of the sport. And so often what will happen is a path towards higher and higher altitudes, which could progressively end at Everest, theoretically. That's a path that is very popular through Alpenglow. Like, one of the things we really focus on is the path to Everest. So we can talk about that. The third thing that happens is people do some of these introductory, and it's very important to do these kind of like low technical difficulty introductory peaks. And then people find they really love the technical side. And so they want to combine technical climbing with the mountaineering background and high summits. And that's almost like a little bit of a different path. That's going to mountains like Alpamayo in Peru and Ama de Balam, these beautiful technical routes that might have grade 4 ice and 5.9 rock climbing while also summiting 20,000 foot peaks and, taking weeks long expeditions, and they're ending up in Pakistan and things like that. Some people do both, but we often do see that split between I want more technical or I want more altitude. But the next step after that introductory mountaineering course is usually going to some bigger summits that will take more than one day. Usually on those introductory mountaineering courses, you're building some skills and then you do a 1 day ascent, maybe 2 days with one night. The next step is like, okay, I'm going to go take a week on one mountain or 2 weeks. And so where we love to do that is in South America, Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, and actually in North America and Mexico, where you can get peaks that are 18,000 to 20,000 feet tall. So they're going to take 2 to 3 camps on a mountain. So they're going to take a few days. We're going to add altitude in. We're going to add more of that like team working for a long period of time to a singular goal. And again, you're going to need to get better and better at all the individual skills to stay efficient enough to be successful. The other cool thing about those trips is you add this cultural piece, and that's always been really different for me. Like I love a Mount Rainier. That's usually like a 2-day climb. It's not a very big climb, but it has a lot of the same technical difficulties as the South American climbs. But you're in the US, you went to Costco to pack for food and things like that. And it's cool. Right. It's cool, but it's different when we do that in a foreign country and we're sort of seeing so many different things. And I just find the experience deeper. I also love when I come down, not going to like an Applebee's after my summit, but going to some like wild restaurant in a small town that I've never been to before in a foreign place. So that is like the foundation of Alpenglow's entire program is, we probably run 20 something trips a year in Ecuador because they're just such incredible experiences mixing culture and climbing and high altitude and seeing if people like this and want to continue. So that's kind of the next step is those multi-day peaks.
And that seems like, I mean, for me, where I'm at in my life, that seems like it could be the destination. Now, one might go on one of these things, as happened to you, and I'm sure many of your clients, and you just get bit by the bug, and you're like, oh, what's next? I'm psyched. And you start building towards, ultimately, to your point, maybe Everest, or, some of these more kind of well-known or iconic big mountain challenges. But for somebody like myself, doing an 18,000 or a 20,000 foot peak in a foreign country that might take me a week or two out of my life, that's bold enough, I think, and exotic enough, and yet achievable enough for where I'm at. Let's talk about the logistics of making that a successful and enjoyable experience, knowing that there's going to be some struggle, and that's part of it. That's part of the joy of coming back from one of these things. But what kind of training, if I'm going to do the Intro to Mountaineering course with Alpenglow, and I'm going to, commit a few days to that, get an understanding of the basic systems, then I come back to Kentucky and I say, okay, I'm going to plan this thing for Ecuador with you guys. What are you going to have me doing over the next 6 months or 12 months? How far out does one kind of need to prepare for something like that?
Yeah, of course, it sort of depends on what that base of fitness is, right? Sure. And like how used to someone is to endurance training. For our Ecuador programs, we actually have an in-house coach. Her name's Lynette Talbot. She's incredible. So as soon, Alpenglow's kind of model is, and I recommend a model like this, is kind of holistic, right? Like once someone joins the team by signing up for a trip, they're in. Our gear specialist is going to work with them on gear. Our training specialist is going to work with them on training. I'm going to be the cheerleader, sending those little text messages, just being like, you got it. Yeah, like everyone's got a different role. I'm just the cheerleader. I don't really do anything else at Alpenglow anymore. And I love that role. But so from a training perspective, it's going to be like, we really like people to do like a 12 to 16 week program with us. So like right away, we're going to kind of see where people are at, and we're going to encourage at least this base level program. And then if either someone needs it or wants it, more personalized coaching, like often our in-house coach, Lynette, will work with someone's trainer who's in person with them in whatever city they're in, to kind of just tailor what's best for them. So it is going to be different for different people. But if I had to give like a general breakdown, it's like 70% is going to be low intensity cardio training on the device of your choice. Hopefully that's outside, hiking up hills with a backpack on. But for a lot of people, it can't be. So it might be a treadmill, it might be a Stairmaster, it might be a road bike. As people get more serious, it's stairwells in cities are just incredible trainers. Like if you have a 60-story building and you can go up with a pack on and then ride the elevator back down so you're not blowing your knees, and then do it again, and we're doing multi-hour workouts in staircases. Right. Like, again, that's a bit further down the path, people working towards bigger mountains. But everybody has the ability to train. I think it's easy and it's understandable. You see some like jealousy between clients coming from, let's say, Boston or New York, and there's someone else coming from Salt Lake City, and they're like, oh, it was so much easier for you because you could just walk outside and be in the mountains. And it's true. It was easier, but it is possible everywhere. Like I lived in Miami, Florida for 2 years as a full-time high-altitude mountain guide. Right. It's a long story, but like I still made it work, right? Like it is possible.
All right, that seems like a good place here to fade out on this free episode here, this free peek at the Pro Clinic with Mountaineer Adrian Ballinger. I'm sorry to fade out like that, but that's kind of how I keep the lights on. Over here in the podcast/utility closet is by offering these Pro Clinics and bonus episodes and some other cool stuff to people who are supporters as Patreon and Apple subscribers. But you can listen to the rest of this conversation here with Adrian for free. So if you are totally psyched, like I am now, to get out and have one of these high altitude experiences, and maybe you don't have a few bucks a month to support me here in what I'm doing on The Struggle, well, then you can listen for free. I'll tell you about that in just a second. But first, let me tell you what else Adrian covers in the other hour of this Pro Clinic that's waiting for you on the other side. Well, we talk about how to learn basic mountaineering skills near your home, how to go from zero experience all the way up to Everest if you want. They've got a track at Alpenglow that will do that, or you can also just basically figure it out yourself, and Adrian talks about how to do that as well. He talks about the best mountains to start your journey on and his favorite 20,000 foot peak in the world, and that is the one that I've got my eyes set on. How to manage high altitude sickness, which is something that I'm a little bit concerned of myself, being pretty low elevation here, low altitude in Kentucky, and how pre-acclimatization can reduce time away from home by 50%. So I'm super busy. I'm sure you are too. They've got this rapid ascent system over at Alpenglow that they've helped to pioneer, which essentially helps you to adapt to high altitude at home. So Adrian talks through that system. We talk about summit success rates, like if you're going to invest this money and this time and do all sorts of training, what are your chances of actually getting to the top, and what are the factors that might shut down a summit attempt? Adrian shares beta on how to train for these kinds of adventures, whether you live in the mountains or you live in Miami, where he lived for a couple of years as a high altitude guide. You can do it from wherever. And then we dive into budgets and expeditions that range from $500 to $95,000 and everything in between. How can you have some of these experiences yourself? It's not just like a commercial for Alpenglow, like Adrian shares how you can go out there and just do this yourself like he did and so many have done. Or if you're a busy professional and you just want to go out and have a life-changing experience, but maybe you only have a week or two in order to do so, that's kind of more the camp that I'm in now at this point in my life. He talks about the costs and the options for doing it that way, whether it's through Alpenglow or some of the other great outfits that are around the world. And he also talks about some of the not great outfits or the ones that you want to be wary of if you're interested in having a really positive experience out in these mountains. All that and just so much more is available for about the price of a beer over on Patreon or Apple subscriptions, or actually zero cost right now with a free trial. So if you want to hear the rest of this Pro Clinic, plus get instant access to more than 100 hours of other banger content, and I'm talking about Pro Clinics and bonus episodes from the likes of Adam Ondra, Chris Sharma, Nina Williams, Dave McLeod, Hazel Finley, Tom Randall, Alex Honnold, and so many more. It's all over there. I think it's worth a few bucks a month, but if you don't like it, you can cancel anytime. No worries, no questions asked. If you're an iPhone person, you can subscribe right there in your Apple Podcast player, or just swing on over to patreon.com/The Struggle Climbing Show to support me there and get instant access to all those goods. Now be sure to check your show notes for links from this conversation and how to work with today's pro, and you can see clips from this conversation over on IG at The Struggle Climbing Show. The Struggle is carbon neutral in partnership with the Honnold Foundation and is a proud member of the Plugtone Audio Collective, a diverse group of the best, most impactful podcasts in the outdoor industry. This show was produced and hosted by me, Ryan Devlin, and edited by Glenn Walker. All right, what are you waiting for? Pop over to Patreon and listen to the rest of this Banger Pro Clinic. I hope your training and your climbing are going great. And you know what? If you're struggling like me, well, let's just remember that the struggle makes us stronger. I'll see y'all.